So that changes the game for NFTs, I think, because we all know that NFTs are not just about art, PFPs and everything else. It's a contract that can now operate at scale for low cost. Anatoly, good to see you back on Real Vision.
Thanks for having me.
I think I checked. The last time we chatted was September last year. There's been a lot happening, particularly in Solana. I mean, it's been
the most boring 6 months in crypto, right?
Yeah, we've gone from the entire space having an existential threat to a massive rally, from the lows as well. But look, I wanted to catch up with you because, I have a very close eye on Solana and the ecosystem, and you guys are doing a lot. And I think it's really, really interesting to talk through some of the things you've got going on. So I think the first one that I really wanted to talk through is Saga, the mobile stack, and everything that's happening there, because you're now in launch phase. So really interested to hear your thoughts, what you're up to, and where you think it's going.
Yeah, we launched. The hardware's here. You can see it. It's real. Real devices are being shipped to people all over the world. So it's been really exciting to go from an idea to a physical hardware product. That's the pinnacle, I think, of hardware today is a phone, right? It's a device you use every day. People are very sensitive about the build quality, the screen touch, kind of tactile feeling, all of that stuff, right? We're all used to having these devices to be exceptionally well done. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive. So I'm really excited that the product is good. And they're being shipped. We're awesome. The company that built these, folks don't know, was founded by Jason Keats, who was the architect of iPad Pro. He's a super hardware nerd. They've done just a phenomenal job on the build quality. I think this is the best Android device out there. And we are getting a ton of requests for applications. I think it's over 20 already in the App Store. iOS launched with 15 apps when the iPhone launched. So we just needed to cover that many. And we're getting things are moving.
Why did you start the crazy path of going down the hardware route, being a blockchain, and then thinking, why the hardware route? I mean, it's a great idea, but
I spent most of my career at Qualcomm. So I was there from early flip phone days until my team was in the advanced technology group was working to enable the first augmented reality device, in a phone form factor. So I was there from phones can barely do ringtones to phones are now everything. And it was a really cool and exciting time. And as soon as I got into crypto and as soon as I started working on it, it just became obvious to me that every phone in the world is going to have to be a hardware wallet at one point or another. That's just inevitable. And the technology to do that, interestingly enough, I know my close friends worked on that to enable that. The ability for this phone to prevent Android from seeing what's on the screen for a secure display, prevent from the operating system from seeing your touch inputs on the keyboard, a secure keyboard, to the signing secure element, which is stored in they were defending it against electron microscope scoping, attacks, scraping it, really crazy stuff. All that stuff is here. It was already this technology was already there, in 2017. So I just immediately thought that eventually every phone in the world is going to have to be a hardware wallet, equivalent capability. So I started asking investors and friends hey, what if we built a phone? Do you guys know anyone that knows the OEM side of the business? And I talked to a bunch of the big companies and eventually met Jason Keats, who is himself, he was employee 1 or 2 at Essential, which is a Android startup that built awesome devices, worked at Apple and wanted to build a phone himself. So we kind of melded minds, okay, we can build the Tesla Roadster of Android phones. It's an awesome device, but it's also, I think, needs a soul, it has to have something that isn't just Android. And I think part of that it has to be Web3 and crypto and getting developers excited about an open app store and getting users excited about like hardware security for their self-custody. And I think the combination of those things create really, really cool user experiences for Web3. There's videos of like Phantom, they're working on, like we added like a couple features to make the experience even better than it is today, where you can look at their video. It's like just like Apple Pay, a little slider from Phantom like slides up from the bottom to the, halfway to the screen. You tap the fingerprint scanner in the back, it signs, and like transaction goes through like almost instantly on Solana. As fast as Apple Pay. Like if you compare it, it's as good. That to me is really, really cool. And you have those kind of wonderful user experiences with hardware security and like a real app store for Web3. I think that's kind of like the start of it,
And are you thinking that it's only going to be Solana, or it will be Web3 native in however it works?
This is a huge undertaking and very risky, like implementation wise. Not just people hate the product and buy it, that's just one thing. But like even just execution is massive undertaking. So we basically cut all features except what's necessary to ship, which meant we're not experts on Ethereum and Bitcoin and all these other networks. So we just basically just ship Solana, but we're adding support for curves, for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, for all these other networks. And then people will be able to write wallets and interact with the seed vault and sign Bitcoin transactions in the same way. And like, we don't really care. Like from my perspective, I'm more of an open source maximalist than I am even a Solana maximalist.
and how do you integrate Solana within that as being like the core tech for some of this as well? Because obviously you don't just want to have a Web3 phone. You want a phone, yes, it helps the whole ecosystem, but it needs to weave Solana into its kind of core infrastructure.
You don't actually need to weave that much. What I want is actually like whatever APIs that we need for wallets to be able to have that like awesome UX for signing, whether it's interpayment and stuff like that. I want that to be open. Like the problem is like when you look at like the Google ecosystem, even though Android is open, GMS and like Google Pay are closed sandboxes. So you can't plug in your own payments infrastructure into the Google mobile stack. You can't plug in your own app store like through their APIs in the open world. You have to work with an OEM to do that. So like same thing with Apple. Apple's even worse, right? If we could like ship an iOS device with changes, we would totally do it, but zero chance of that happening. If you try, they will come after you. So like that's the problem, right? It's like, but what we want is this thing to be open, and whatever API Solana needs, Solana itself is open. So everything's open source. Everyone else will be able to plug in their own infrastructure if they want to. And this could be an open platform for a lot of users. Obviously, because we're experts in Solana, things are probably going to move faster. Features are going to be added faster on Solana. But like if there's, whoever else, like the Tezos team gets really, really excited about it and wants to work with us, we'll definitely the book is already open, but we'll like help them. We'll unblock them wherever we can.
And how are you finding the industry, the other wallet providers or just other people in the industry, how they the NFT marketplaces and all of this stuff?
Yeah.
What's their reception so far?
People definitely get it. Like everyone in the industry gets it. There's this kind of, for folks that don't understand why it's such a pain in the ass to work with the big app stores, it really goes back to, I think, what people think of software and digital goods in general. Like you can't really buy a copy of Windows in a box and like own it and then give it to your friends, right? Or sell it on eBay. Can't really do that anymore. You sort of can, but like with Windows, you barely can. You definitely can't do that with like a video that you buy on Amazon or like a song on iTunes. You don't actually own that digital content, even though you bought it and it says buy to own. You don't actually own it. You can't transfer it. There's no markets for it, right? So these are goods that you're effectively renting from these giant kind of conglomerates. And that means that their business models are designed around extracting rent, like value from that rent. And the way that that works is that if you own the content and you're on iOS, you can sell the content to all the folks that have Apple devices, and Apple lets you do that, but they want 30% of that. And 30% is an insane tax. It's a massive sales tax, right? It's like absurd. There would be a revolution, right? Like the revolutions were started over lower taxes than that. So it's a massive, massive tax, but all the content producers are able to pay it because they own the content and they're renting it to their users. So they don't really care. Like they get more revenue, more profit, so they're willing to do it. But with Web3, the marketplaces don't own the content. Magic Eden doesn't own any of the NFTs. They can't add a 30% tax in the iOS mobile experience and charge their iOS users 30% more or eat that cost themselves, because that would wipe out their profits. Their fee is like 2-3%, and people argue about that, but it's literally 10 times less than that, right? So that's kind of the fundamental problem, is that like the business models are set up around like users not like renting the content and the value extraction coming from that, instead of content truly be owned by users and freely tradable and exchangeable. That's really, I think, the heart of Web3. So we need an app store to enable like developers to basically do whatever they want to do. Like Magic Eden just even have like a simple like, NFT storefront in mobile. They need an app store like this.
Hey everyone, Raoul's Mentioned Crypto, it's really my flagship show. It's where I interview the best guests in the world, people you never get on another show. I think it's the best show in macro, crypto, and Web3 combined. In fact, that's what it does. It covers everything. But really, it's all about the revolution in Web3 and crypto. And I'd love it if you got it every week in your inbox. All you have to do is just click on the link below, pop in your email address, and you'll get notified every time it comes out. And you don't miss anything as you take my journey into the exciting new world of crypto and Web3. Thanks.
And is this available globally so far, or is it just US?
It's globally, yeah. It's basically like the bottlenecks there are like certification, and we gone through all the easy ones. I think it's like 40 countries or something like that. And there's some that are very huge pain in the butt, like South Korea. Basically have to be Samsung to get certification through. In India, you have to make the phone in India. There's some ways to kind of get like the final pieces put together there and stuff like that. So like, but this is also kind of an expensive device. We wanted to build a device that was, when people got it, that they were like inspired, like it's really good build quality. They kind of can see the vision, like, okay, this is not just some...
It has to compete with an iPhone and its quality feel. Right. It has to.
For like the early adopters, I think it has to. I think the opportunity possibly could come from a much cheaper mass market device that then also earns rewards at scale for things like Helium, for things like HiveMapper, like that could be, I think, really transformative for the world. If you have a device that's effectively free, but also kind of gives you like $5-10 a month, right? That could even cover effectively like your Helium, like data rate at that point.
And what's the price point right now for it?
It's $1,000.
It's $1,000, right? And have you looked at what phones most of the kind of Web3 community use right now, outside of India and others, but in the Western world? Are you having to move people across from an iPhone environment? It's
a split, actually. Like in the US, 60 to 70% use iOS. And outside of the US, it's closer. There's actually more Android devices. So Apple has like it's pretty dominant in the United States. And a lot of users in the US are like, religious about it. But I don't think I've ever seen anyone tweet, except for this device, that they're willing to switch from iOS. So a lot of people actually care more about crypto than they do about Apple, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, although, everything I've got is integrated in Apple. So the only way it works for me is, and a lot of people who have this, is just two phones. Is like one for your Web3 life, because it makes it easy, because it's a nightmare otherwise. So if you solve making it easy, and then you can still keep your Apple Music and everything else elsewhere.
The thing is, like, this is a Google-enabled phone, too. It has GMS and all the services. So if you're like me, I have an iPhone they use Chrome for my browser, I use Gmail for my mail app. Google Maps generally for maps. Like you kind of like when you make the switch, the only difference is like which way you got to slide up to find apps. That's really that's about it. So for a lot of users that are, I'd say, like don't use the defaults on iOS, I think the switch is basically negligible.
So there's another big thing I want to talk to you about, which is the compression of NFTs that you've just rolled out, which I think is a really fucking big deal. Talk us through it and what you're thinking with it.
So this was a really cool ecosystem-wide effort. It was some folks from Labs worked on the smart contract, a lot of folks from Metaplex worked on the spec and like the rest of the kind of application side, and a bunch of the infrastructure providers like Helium and like Helios, not Helium, and Triton, and like built the indexers to do this. And the underlying technology is pretty old, I would say, as far as crypto is concerned. You even actually have seen it in Bitcoin. It's called a stateless accumulator. And in Bitcoin, there's an implementation called the U3XO, if you ever heard of that. So these are ways for basically, you're kind of conceptually, if you want to think about it, you're trading the state space for ledger. So ledgers are actually cheaper to store because they're on disk. They don't need to be accessed immediately for consensus. Like when you do execution of smart contracts, you don't need to, like, you can't typically look back in history. You get access to the recent state, but not the rest of the history. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the stuff that you have in the most immediate state, that's the most expensive state that you can have in the smart contract platform. So the way stateless accumulators work is you store a Merkle root or some kind of accumulator, could be other fancy cryptographic thing, but Merkle roots work great. That's what we use. They're very simple and very fast. And then you track updates and changes to that Merkle root through transactions that post the proof to the state and then the new state, and it recomputes the proof and updates the Merkle root. So all the information you need to reconstruct the root and the entire kind of tree is in the ledger. So if you play it back, you can reconstruct the entire tree, but it's not stored in that immediate state. So indexers like Helios and Triton and all these other folks, as they're playing the ledger for their RPC infra, they produce all these witnesses and stuff, and they maintain a larger portion of the state and serve it to the users like Magic Eden and so forth. But validators that are running the chain and doing all this consensus work don't have to store that entire thing in the immediate, in RAM effectively, right? In that really fast accessible storage, can get put on tape drives for all we care, right? So like that's really, I think, the trade-off, and that dramatically cuts costs on the amount of like how much it costs to actually update and store and deal with these things. So the price to mint NFTs is now the cost of just sending a transaction and modifying a state root. That state root is very cheap, doesn't allocate any more state once you allocate that tree. And it becomes the cost drops to like about $130, $150 to mint a million NFTs.
So that changes the game for NFTs, I think, because we all know that NFTs are not just about art, PFPs and everything else. It's a contract that can now operate at scale for low cost, ticketing, all this stuff. Where are you thinking this is going, and who's getting interested in this? Because I think it's a huge breakthrough.
Where I think like the early adopters of this have been like, it's still Solana smart like applications, but one that's really interesting is Dialect. They're basically like built a messaging app. In that messaging experience, every sticker pack that you use in messaging it's an NFT, and they constantly do mint, and people collect all these NFTs from all these like famous creators and stuff and trade them. And the user is not aware of the gas costs. Like in the UX, you're sending like a smart message where I can request an NFT from you or send you a payment like you would send cash in iOS, right? If you ever use their like cash application. And then that user experience, the user just sees that message, they click the button to sign. It like all happens behind the scenes. There's no gas. You're not dealing with this complex thing. Okay, what am I supposed to pay? How much? Like it just happens magically. It feels like a Web2 app, but everything is trustless. Like all the actual ownership, everything else, everything is done with self-custody. It's really, really cool. So like that kind of user experience, I think, is enabled by this massive price reduction. The other one that's also in the similar vein is called Drip House. They've minted, I think, over 1 million of these compressed NFTs, something around that order. And they're kind of running a subscription service for like NFT users. So you get like mints every week, and people get these NFTs from all sorts of other artists, and they've minted over 1 million. And that's been pretty cool. I think their estimation is they've onboarded like 150,000 humans, like people in like about a span of like 3-4 months. It's been really, really cool. So for them, that price reduction allowed them to just scale up how many of these NFT drops they're doing. But obviously, there's also other use cases. So every hotspot that Helium had on their original layer 1, they announced that they're moving to Solana. The way that they implemented that is that every hotspot is a compressed NFT. They minted 1 million NFTs for every hotspot. It cost them a few $100. And now it's all that state is tracked on Solana, all the ownership and everything else. And like, that's a really, really practical application that is kind of becomes a no-brainer, I think, for effectively logistics companies or anyone else that's tracking needs a system to track a whole bunch of like distributed crowdsourced hardware. So stuff like that, I think, is pretty exciting to have happened, I think, in the last couple of months. And this is only, we launched this thing like 2 months ago.
Yeah, my view is, I've been thinking NFTs are really the solution for ticketing and secondary markets and getting rid of ticket scalps and all of that stuff. We've seen Ticketmaster play around with a lot of this stuff. It just feels like now, with something like this and this cheap, it can be tickets for anything. It can be literally tickets for anything. And that's a game changer, because then you onboard tons of people into Web3 without even realizing it's Web3, because everybody has a ticket for something.
For sure. Yeah, Ticketmaster has like kind of a crazy monopoly in tickets. So that one's, that's a hard, tough nut to crack.
Well, they're doing stuff in NFTs right now. I mean, they're giving away NFTs. I mean, they've used a couple of different chains already. So, they're all looking.
That would be like, yeah. So for them to scale up, give away 100 million NFTs or something like that a year, Solana would be the place to do it. We've seen some early.
Well, I'm just thinking it just replaces the physical ticket. They've got a digital wallet. It probably costs them about the same cost to process the ticketing, but it means that they get a secondary market in the tickets and they can have a marketplace and they get to control a lot. It's quite different.
The challenge there, I think, is like how much, like, there's always tension between centralized companies and decentralized ones in terms of how to use this technology, because you can use it in a very controlled way where you're running effectively like co-signing every transaction and allow only the transfers that you want to allow. But the natural ethos of every like Web3 builder is that we're building digital assets that are freely transferable and freely tradable. And that's always like that tension between like these big centralized companies.
Yeah, but I think that's solvable because, again, with something like ticketing at scale, music tickets, sports tickets, is you just create a marketplace where now you and I could sell. I'm sure there might be a royalty in the smart contract as there is with the standard NFT. Ticketmaster gets paid for the transfer, but we're now free because I can't go to the game. I want to sell my ticket instantly. I don't have to go to a tout outside the stadium, pay a 50% spread. And it just becomes very efficient, and it's decentralized in that matter. Sure, the issuing isn't, but then the spread of it is. I looked at hotel rooms. That's another one I've looked at. It's another thing where, I will have gone to cancelled hotel rooms at the last minute. You lose all the money. The hotel doesn't like it because you're not in the bar drinking a glass of wine, eating a burger. And if you could just have them as NFTs, they become transferable. And that solves everybody's problems.
For sure. Everything's a market.
Really, everything is a market, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I think it's going to be interesting. How much activity does it create on chain? So at kind of protocol layer,
humans create very little activity. It's barely you can't even tell.
But meaning, if you're issuing millions of NFTs, is it creating a lot of demand for Solana itself, for Sol itself, or it's because it's very efficient, it's batched?
No, even like the problem is like, so Solana does like 30 million transactions per day. 90% of them from applications alone. 90% of them come from Oracle updates and market makers, so that are machine driven. So they're like market making, like central limit order books. And then like adding 1 more million issuance per day is just like 1 or 2% more growth, right? And that the problem there is that like the amount of traffic that's generated by human activity is always going to be much, much smaller than like machine automated, like robot activity, where they're basically like, you know, trying to extract value out of 1 penny transactions and stuff like that through arbitrage in these markets. So I really suspect that the scale that's being added to all of these chains for parallel processing, like from handling, you know, vast amount of transactions across many different parts of state, it's mostly going to be eaten up by like effectively machine automated arbitrage and that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that the chain is going to be expensive or congested. It's just that there's going to be some lower bound floor price, you know, that all these machines will take advantage of. And then you as a person, like right now on Solana, I think the fee per transaction is 1/1000th of a penny. You as a person can pay 1/100th of a penny and not even care, but you will be prioritized 10 times more than every machine.
The other big thing you've got going on is these projects migrating onto Solana, like Helium.
Yep.
Talk us through that as well, because that's another really fascinating development where people are kind of abandoning their original thing and then joining up with you guys to use your tech stack.
So this is a lot of work to build a layer 1 blockchain. And a lot of people knew that going into this and needed something more scalable than what existed before. So you know, go back to like 2017, Ethereum was even less scalable than it is now. And you know, there were no layer 2 technologies. Like the only thing you could do is to actually, you know, take Tendermint and go roll your own chain. So a lot of folks did that. And when you actually get to a certain scale, like Helium did, tracking 1 million devices on a kind of your standard roll your own blockchain, it's quite expensive, like internally, operationally wise. Because it's a complex technology. You have to have like a really smart team of dedicated engineers that are constantly unblocking all the bottlenecks in these systems, making them cheaper, faster. And at some point you realize that like that's not your core business. You know, for them, they care about wireless technologies, right? They'd rather have those engineers working on 5G, things like that. And that is our core business. I love, I love making blockchains cheaper and faster.
And you also know the telephone business, the phone business as well. So it kind of works for you perfectly, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would rather work on blockchain than radio protocols. So I know exactly what I want to work on. So that's kind of natural occurrence. I think you'll see some consolidation. There's a couple designs that make sense in the space. Solana's one. I think Ethereum's like layer 2 model is another design that's like, it's like a nice, you know, there's Pareto efficient trade-offs between all of them. If you pick one that you're optimizing for one thing, I think Ethereum is valid. I think Solana is a pretty good one, obviously. So people gravitate towards one or the other in my view.
So we're going to see more of these smaller projects that had their own chain just migrate across onto the bigger, faster, better supported chains so they can focus on their business and not worry about blockchain.
If they're hitting scale like Helium did, like with, you know, hundreds of thousands of users, millions of assets being tracked, it becomes a big undertaking to run your own. You could always use Tendermint for small scale projects. I mean, that's battle tested, awesome technology. It's kind of like, you know, think of Apache from the 90s. Like I want to roll my own website. I'm going to spin up Apache and not worry about it. It's single server with like CDB or something simple or SQLite. That's like probably the most dominant website, like the way to run a website right now still, right? But at some point you hit a certain amount of scale that, you know, if you have to hire specialists in that field to, you know, maintain your databases and maintain that technology, you're probably doing it wrong, you know, like, because there's open source solutions like Solana that are, you know, we have our entire team is full of specialists, and that's all we do day in, day out.
Yeah, because I think some people thought that the value was going to accrue in the chain for a project like that. And so therefore, because they could issue a token, and I think they're now realizing that actually it can stand on its own. An applications layer on top of blockchain can can accrue its own value and doesn't need to have a chain itself?
I don't think a layer one can accrue value from its inefficiencies. I think that's just not going to last. That's to anyone that's like true believer in capitalism, right? Like, especially when you have something like open source software, right? It's a technology that anyone can improve and fork and build upon. It's going to become efficient very, very rapidly. So I don't think layer ones will be able to accrue value by being inefficient. They have to be optimally efficient at something and then have some other means to accrue value.
Do you think, I'm starting to think through that this is probably going to be the last wave of layer ones that we see? You know, this next phase. There's a few more to come. We've just had Aptos, we've got Sui, we've got a few others. And then it feels like, do we need any more layer ones?
I think you will always see with every step function in technology, you should see new operating systems, new databases, new layer ones.
The world doesn't work that way in the fact that they don't actually always get traction, because people, you know, traction's sticky. It's weird.
Everyone would have thought you don't need any more operating systems after Windows, but there was a use case that they couldn't fit into, which was running, you know, an OS on everything, which Linux and like BSD and whatever family of operating systems fit really, really nicely. And you will see, like, you know, you can think of Moore's law as every 20 years, it's 1,000x difference. And it's really, really hard to predict what 1,000x means. Like, it's just like really, really tough, right? So I believe we will always see some innovation, both in databases and like operating systems and layer one blockchains. But whether they will get the same kind of traction, that's probably true, unless there's some paradigm shift.
Or it's a specific use case, like derivative markets or something like that. Because it's very hard otherwise once you've got a broad ecosystem where you can use all sorts of functionality applications and there's a big developer group. If not, it's hard.
It's very hard to compete with Windows on desktop, right? You're not going to build another Windows. But Linux found its niche, right? So you have to kind of, I think you'll likely see that like happening, like specialized niches being discovered by new different implementations.
And so do you think that you're going to see more migration of projects coming onto Solana and away from their own layer ones?
Yeah, Surrender to, like, they didn't run on layer one, but they also want to migrate to Solana because they want kind of the same cheap, fast transactions to handle a larger set of devices and data sets on chain. So I'm hoping, right, obviously, this is what we built Solana for, but as we see, I think crypto will definitely have traction in infra and like in like kind of crowd-based or whatever you want to call it, large-scale coordination of infrastructure like Helium and Render. Like, I think it's obviously better than doing the stuff with like a giant corporation that has to go get like do all the stuff on its own. It's actually like, you know, way more efficient, like resource wise, and things must like deploy and move much faster this way. So I think traction will definitely be there. So I think my view is that like a lot of these projects should run on Solana because of how cheap we can guarantee the fees to be and access to state and stuff like that.
It also feels like, and I know this is it's one of these trendy things to say, but it feels that AI and blockchain are coming together, and it feels like it's an obvious way to both allocate and pay for compute resources is just using a token system.
It depends. So there's like the big question, is AI will always going to be expensive? It's like kind of unknown question. That's never really happened in technology before, right? Like we rapidly...
No, it just goes like this, always.
Yeah. We exponentially reduced the unit economic costs and everything that's useful in tech. But does AI just progressively get better with the more resources you throw at it? This is kind of a big unknown. I kind of doubt it. I think we will see inference drop really quickly in price, but there's an opportunity for, I think, these kind of like crowdsourced hardware platforms that are token incentivized physical networks to provide the resources to do inference at scale globally and training as well. And that could be really, really cool. So I think Render is probably, I think, working on something like that, if not already.
The other thing is, I remember over the summer when everybody was getting ultra bearish over everything. And one thing that stood out to me was the amount of developer activity in Solana, right? It was a true north for me when I was looking at it. It's like, this is fucking insane. You know, it was trading at $9, wherever it was, and this massive developer community was remaining vibrant. Your hackathons just seem to grow and grow and grow. I'm not trying to be this is not a Solana promotion piece, but it just, you know, I just observe it, and you guys are just doing an astonishing job with getting people to do stuff.
Well, I think it's really, really hard to build a blockchain, and you have to optimize for cost, right? Like the cost of transactions, cost of state, throughput and finality, and the size of the network. And like we've, I think, been pushing on all of those fronts, and it's a huge engineering effort, and we've done pretty well. Like I think it's the second largest smart contract platform by node count. So like in validators, in terms of validators. So there's massive decentralization, a lot of throughput, very low fees. And developers see that as kind of an unlock to do something that they couldn't do before. And that's really, really important. You know, like it's really, really hard to sell to devs. You have to give them like a tool that they can't get anywhere else. That's kind of like the key part. And can you give them something that they can use as like a superpower that they can't do anywhere else? And few technologies do that. I think Solana does that with its low fees, that devs can just kind of like, okay, I have very, very cheap fees, fast transactions. What are the applications that I can build there? You know, they kind of start, you know, thinking about really cool things. And that's, I think, the stickiness is, it's not because the chain is like, has super great developer experience. Like in fact, like the joke is it's like eating glass. And that's because like the sacrifices that we had to make to like make the chain as that fast meant there's more complexity in the runtime, or there's more developers have to do more work to take advantage of that speed, right? Like it's not easy to build something really fast, like in software, because of how complex the hardware is. You have to actually like write the software as a very thin layer on top of these very complex CPUs with multiple cores and big little architectures and caches and all this other stuff. Like if you really try to make the system fast, you're exposing a lot of the hardware design that's now become very complicated up to the like application developer. And that means that they have to do more work. But that is actually, I think, an advantage, because that speed is really important in crypto.
So when you're looking out strategically, where is, I know you're an anything chain, but if you think strategically, is your focus on consumerization, i.e. mass market, or infrastructure? Where do you think the really exciting future lies?
Yeah, I naturally like gravitate towards things that have, like, first of all, it's an ecosystem that's kind of, people are going in every direction, every which way.
Yeah.
A company launched real estate on Solana. It's not a use case that I would have thought of, because how often do you do real estate transactions, right? But they like they want a nice user experience for their users, so they want fast transactions. That means that like when we pick a use case that's really depends on that speed and throughput and like large decentralization, it actually solves a problem for a lot of use cases that I haven't thought of. So the stuff that I gravitate towards is actually like, you know, central limit order books, like making sure that information in the system is synchronized as fast as possible, at close to the speed of light as possible around the world, and as fairly as possible. That's a very, very hard problem, and it has very strict, you know, financial requirements, and like it has these like guarantees that are really, really hard to provide, and takes a lot of work to get there. So like Firedancer is like a perfect example of that. If we want to have spreads on chain on Solana in these central limit order books that are as tight as, you know, Binance or CME or whatever, the network has to be 100 times faster. The block times have to shrink to the point where we're competing with physics, where light is synchronizing around the world as fast as Solana, right? Like at that point, we will be competitive with CME, with Binance. So to me, that's an exciting engineering problem. And I see there's real value creation there because it now becomes an open platform that's competing with like the biggest centralized financial institutions. That's really, really cool. But if we achieve that, like dialect sticker packs now move even faster, right? You don't even notice, like the signing experience becomes very slick. The users, like devs can build very delightful Web3 experiences for the users where the users are not even like ever bothered by the fact that they're using crypto. And that's what could lead to mass adoption.
And how are you dealing with or thinking through stuff like music, video, all of that stuff that requires larger file sizes, different things? Because it's obvious that it's got to come, right? Because everybody needs it that way.
So I think a layer one doesn't need to be a storage network. There's been awesome investment in engineering there from like folks like Filecoin, Arweave, Genesis Go. Genesis Go is a homegrown Solana one. They've done a really good job of providing really cheap storage. In fact, I believe we're moving from like AWS to these networks for storing like the Solana data set, the copies that we have. So like that technology I think is awesome. And I think all the rich data that you're going to get from user created or now AI generated should go and be stored in like something like Filecoin or Genesis Go. And Solana itself is there, is the metadata layer. It's just tracking who owns what. And that's a very important layer. You know, that's basically where vast majority of the work in like a big Web2 company comes from, is working in the metadata layer, not the object storage.
And are you seeing people moving in the direction of these big consumer applications? I mean, the monster is like, you know, we've seen how big YouTube is. We see how big, you know, Spotify is. All of these things where, you know, these big cultural phenomena, music and video and stuff, are huge. Are you seeing people starting to understand that all of this can go on chain and it can create a different set of outcomes? Or not yet?
Not yet. I wouldn't say yet. I don't think there's anything close to a competing TikTok or YouTube in Web3. Even though I think the technology is there to do it, you have to convince creators and users that it's worthwhile.
I kind of think it needs to come from the Web2 companies themselves. You know, as they're going to have to learn to destroy themselves. You know, I knew the guys at Google pretty well, and they were all scared of disrupting themselves until Microsoft came and pressed the nuke button, and they're like, fuck, we probably don't have an ad business anymore. We need to, you know, and then they'll be less scared of Web3 because they were so scared of it because of it. So I feel like there's lots of Web3 teams in all of those big Web2 players, and maybe.
I'm very skeptical. I think these businesses, the VPs there, see like real revenues, right? They make billions of dollars from advertisement and all these other business models. For a company the size of Google or Apple, they have to see $1 billion businesses in Web3. And we're just not there yet. There's no like way for them to run a playbook and get to $1 billion or acquire somebody that's making $1 billion in Web3. I think the likely outcome is that like OpenSea, Magic Eden, the marketplaces that have real revenue right now, I don't know how profitable they are, but you know, let's hope that they're somewhat decently profitable. They should be the ones that now go to the next level, reach out to creators and like start establishing like these pipelines, and then Apple or Google acquires them. That's like the more likely scenario of how a big Web2 company gets into Web3. But even that, I think, is still a ways out. Reality, I think we probably need like 20 companies the size of OpenSea, Magic Eden for one of them to get to that next level.
And the other thing I've been thinking through is obviously the digital ID. That's one missing part that we need to operate across all of the system, and particularly with AI and all of that. How are you thinking through that, or what are you seeing?
The zero knowledge proofs to generate, I think, kind of secure digital kind of attestations. I think those are already there. So you can do that.
It's the adoption that's the hard thing. It's the adoption of incumbent players. So
the problem, I think, is that like the way that the laws are written in the United States for like, you know, OFAC checks and things like that is if you're every person, every participant, right, is responsible to do their checks. They can't outsource them. So you can't rely on somebody else's checks to do that, which is why like every time you onboard, you do another KYC check. Just super annoying. I would guess that might be fixable someplace in the world where they kind of a bit more forward thinking on the consumer experience. Maybe in Europe, they'll just be like, okay, everyone, you can all use a single layer. This is how that layer is defined, and then it'll get adopted. But
yeah, if the KYC layer can be governmentally run, then it's zero knowledge proof behind that. It kind of works potentially.
It requires an act of Congress, right? So the timeline on that is who knows.
So that is my other question: is what is going on in the US regulation wise?
It's confusing.
It's really confusing. It feels like there's a bigger agenda here that we're not really seeing. What's your take on the whole thing?
If a democracy is not a shit show, it's not a real democracy. Right. I think that's the real truth of it. You know, there's a lot of different opinions in the US on what crypto is, where it should go, but it's slowly, like, I'm actually pretty optimistic. In the conversations that I've had with like folks in Congress, there's a bunch of them that get it. They get the benefits of transparency and decentralization and all of that. And they're looking for ways to actually do something substantial. And my guess is there'd probably be like a stablecoin bill this year. And that could be a big unlock. Like if we could actually build businesses on top of USDC and more companies could issue their own stablecoins like USDC, right? Fully backed, collateralized, you know, like you can actually start seeing the digital dollar adoption like globally. Like,
yeah, really interesting. I spoke to the team at Franklin Templeton, right? It kind of feels like a boring old asset manager. No, I mean, they're running nodes all over the place. They've tokenized a money market fund. And I'm like, well, that's a stable coin. They said it's a stable coin when we get the regulatory approval for it to be so.
Yep. So like if that happens, I think you will actually start seeing currency competition, like US dollar will probably start competing very heavily on the consumer side with currencies around the world. I just like, it's a huge opportunity for like the US to cement its influence around the world. And it would be a shame if they just shot themselves in the foot. Like if let somebody else do it. And it's much harder, I think, for the China or Japan or even the euro to establish itself as like a kind of a dominant consumer currency. I think it's just much harder. And like if US just waits too long, it'll eventually happen. Somebody will like do the right thing, pass like laws and like get their currency digitized, and it'll be in every consumer application on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, the world exists with some magical thing called the Eurodollar, which nobody knows about, but it's a multi-quadrillion dollar market that's kind of unmeasurable. But it's the movement of dollars offshore outside the United States, and it's gigantic. It's probably the world's biggest marketplace. And all stable coins are fractionalized Eurodollars. So somebody in the Philippines can buy, 50 cents worth of Eurodollars. They don't get access to the dollar system. So it's a huge deal. And the US is going to have to cement its role, because if not, somebody else will take it.
Yeah, it would be such a shame. Just like...
Yeah, exactly right. So final question, what else is exciting for you? It's like you've got a lot going on. I don't know how you keep up with all of this, but good thing is of being open source is everyone's building on top of it. So you're not having to run all of this stuff. But what's getting you excited?
Probably like Fire Dancer has been like the coolest thing watching. So it's a team out of Jump Crypto. It's like led by the chief scientist like Kevin Bowers. They're building a Solana validator from the ground up. Rewritten in C and C++, so optimized to the hilt, and they're doing I think a really, really good job building it the way I wish I could have had we had infinite resources and time. So it's really cool for that team to kind of see the start and end of the maze and be like, okay, this is the design is okay. The implementation can be improved like, 100 different ways, and they get to do it right. And some of the performance numbers that they're releasing and demos and stuff have been astounding. So like they're building the components, and their target is, can the system handle 10 gigabits worth of throughput, which is a couple of million transactions per second. And everything so far seems to point to yes. And this is on commodity hardware. These are like Intel chips you can buy off Amazon. This is not like anything special, no FPGAs yet or anything like that. So that's really exciting. And I think once they're done, and we start to see it in testnet and then upgrade to mainnet, that could be, I think, another step function for performance and cost. And could get us to that, like, holy shit, there's an open network run on commodity hardware that can give us like spreads as tight as Binance. That would be, I think, really, really cool.
Fascinating. Listen, there's so much going on, and there's definitely a lot going on in Solana. So well done. Keep your head down. Let's keep going.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, always appreciate talking to you. Okay, as ever, quite a technical conversation with Anatoly. But the point being is that there is a huge amount of activity and innovation going on within Solana. And I think that's the key thing. If you think about network effects, it's not only the number of people who use the network, but it's the interconnectedness, the applications layer on top. And you can see that Solana has a very robust applications layer, second probably only to Ethereum itself. And that's why it firmly remains on my radar screen as we see how it grows out. I'm also really interested in the mobile phone. Now, I'm an Apple user. Would I get rid of my Apple phone? Almost impossible. Could I have a second phone to navigate my Web3 world? Yeah, I'm actually very interested in that. And as Anatoly said, it's the build out of the first iteration before it kind of opens up for the broader Web3 world, and we can finally have that Web3 mobile experience to help scale this even further. So super interesting. And let's keep following this story as it goes along.
Hey visionaries, thank you for tuning in. For more free crypto content like this, head over to realvision.com/crypto. You'll get early access to the most brilliant minds in the space to cut through the noise, get in-depth analysis, and get you ahead of the curve with unbiased insights.